Welcome everyone to another edition of Gavin Lee Shaw Presents here on channel T-Boo2786 and Facebook, as well as my other self-entitled YouTube channel, Gavin Shaw. Wherever you are, I hope you are blessed and doing safe. We are just waiting for our guest, special district attorney candidate for Orleans Parish and Councilman at Large, Jason Williams, to stop by. We're just waiting any second. We welcome everyone to the platform, to the channel, whoever you are, wherever you are. Hope you are blessed and doing safe. We're going to get started in a little bit, so just sit tight and relax and we'll enjoy the show. In the meantime, guys, I ask that you please donate to the channel. We are self-run here. I don't give any money for this, but if you like to contribute, you can do so at Google Pay, gavin.gwich1@gmail.com, or you can donate to the Cash App link that you see at the bottom. Gavin Shaw, Esquire. Hey, y'all sit tight. Okay, we are still waiting for Mr. Williams to drop by, guys. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Let me turn my camera on. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Gavin Sharp Presents here on channel Gbu 786. Whoever you are, wherever you are, again, I hope you're blessed and doing safe. A lot is going on right now in the media and the world. Obviously, we're a week away from the 2020 elections, the presidential election, of course, but there are other things on the ballot. Constitutional amendments here in Louisiana are on the ballot, as well as the race for district attorney, which is very important. Races for civil court judges. We also have criminal court judges that are up, seats that are up for grabs. And about a month ago in September, we had Judge Arthur Hunter, former retired Judge Arthur Hunter, stop by, fellow St. Aug grad, give his thoughts about his plans if he is elected as district attorney of Orleans Parish, basically taking over from the previous administration under Leon Canizero. So what I like to do, and what I was trying to do was get different people who are running to try and come on this platform and talk with us to let us know about what their plans and agenda is. So as we speak, I'm having Councilman Jason Williams come on. He's a council member at large, actually, and some information that you can look up with Jason. I'm actually just waiting for him to come on in. And let me just see if we got anybody. We have some people obviously watching. I want to see if there are any comments. Anybody has anything to say? Uh, I know it's in the middle of the day, so right now people will probably tune in and watch this a little bit later if they are at work right now, or they may be listening at work, whoever's watching right now. So thank you for tuning in. And of course, we have information on Jason. Jason obviously grew up here in New Orleans, although I believe he graduated as a graduate of Tulane University as well as Tulane Law Center, Tulane Law School, excuse me. He's a member of the Democratic Party. He is married to the Dr. Elizabeth Marcel Williams with 3 children, and he has a practice here in New Orleans. He is also one of the biggest cases that he took on was actually for Boosie. He was Boosie's criminal defense attorney, Lil Boosie. So we're going to ask him about that. He was also pro tempore judge of criminal district court appointed by the Louisiana Supreme Court back in 2003. So I'm going to ask him a little bit about that, being a pro tempore judge as well as working with Lil Boosie. I think everybody would be interested in hearing about that. I do want to ask him what his plans are as far as nonviolent offenders. I also want to ask him. Oh, wait. Sorry. I also want to ask him about his plans as far as bail reform, if he has any. Now, those in the New Orleans area, you know that Jason also has he had an indictment that was handed down as public news back in June on federal charges of fraud and I believe income tax uh, tax charges, if I'm not mistaken. I will ask him briefly a few maybe questions about that, but I don't want that to be the main focus of this interview for those that are inquiring. So I'm just waiting for Jason to come on in and see if he is available. I know he's very busy, but we're thankfully hoping he can stop by. He said he would stop by, so that's a good thing. But also some other things that are in the news. This morning, it was brought to my attention that there was another police involved shooting out in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, with his brother, Walter Williams, if I'm not mistaken. And it's my understanding, I actually saw the video um, that was on Instagram. I really don't want to look at it again, but it was disheartening, to say the least, to see this brother be shot and killed while he carried a knife. And I don't know all the details, but it's coming out that he had some mental health issues. And I believe this didn't happen today. I think it happened last night. And the people over in Philadelphia, they were protesting and rioting, and highly upset right now over what happened out there in Philadelphia. So Right now, man, we said that this is red hot summer with 2020, with the incident with George Floyd, with the other incidents with Breonna Taylor, and I, there's been so many police shooting, other police involved killings. I can't think of them right now. That's how many there've been. You know, you could take your pick, but it's not nothing funny to laugh at. But nevertheless, it's hard to go over things like that when you see that. And you know, it's just been, you know, we say this is red hot summer. It's been red hot fall as well. I think orange October, because there's so much uh, things going on, whether it's Donald Trump, whether it's Joe Biden, whether it's, uh, you know, just a lot of craziness. Of course, Jacob Blake was the other one. I forgot about him. Yeah, them and so many. And we have actually accomplished more in the streets than we have in the voting booth. Now, as I stated before, I'm not against voting. Of course, I wouldn't have someone on my platform if I were. But I do not think that voting is the end all and be all of Black liberation and liberty. I think we have to do far more than what is expected. We have to put in Black economics. We have to practice group economics. I've talked about that. We have to follow uh, the plans of people like Dr. Claude Anderson and so forth. I see Lester Wheeler. What's up, Lester? I would like to know, what are we getting for our vote? That is a question that I would definitely like to ask him about. What is it that he is trying to bring forth? Of course, there are other people that are running for district attorney here. And I think more and more Black people are asking those same questions. What are we getting for our vote? What are we getting for our vote? Because we often vote, and most of the time when we're voting out of fear. We're voting out of not having the other guy. And that is not enough. I think those days are over of having just we want to see, excuse me, that we just want to see a Black person in there, or we just want somebody that's not the other guy. Young people, especially in my age bracket, have gotten fed up with that. We don't like it when all you're going to give us is the talk, you know, about, well, you need to vote for him because I'm not the other guy. You don't get a job. I couldn't get a job in a top law firm if I said, if I walked in on an interview and they asked me, "Well, tell us about yourself. What qualifies you?" And said, "Well, I think I'm better than the last candidate you've interviewed." You know, that doesn't work that way. The world doesn't work that way. Other groups don't vote like that either. So it's important that you have something like that and keep that in mind, that voting is a tool. It is not the end all and be all obligation. While you are affected locally, we're more impacted locally by who the district attorney is and the judges are, rather than even who the president is. You know, local and state impacts affect us more here. So I'm waiting to see where Jason is right now, if he's coming on. So just give me another minute, guys. And if you could hit that like and subscribe button, share this video. You know, yesterday we had Brother Omar Tyree on. I enjoyed that interview, and again, special thanks to Valerie Denise Jones for setting that up for us. Yeah, special thanks to her. And I'm gonna, while we're waiting on our guest, I think we can go ahead and we'll check out the that Philadelphia. What's going on in Philadelphia right now? Let me pop up ads. This is courtesy of CNN.
Breaking news: a deadly police shooting in Philadelphia. Video shows officers telling the 27-year-old African-American man to drop a knife before repeatedly opening fire. CNN's Alexander Field joins us now.
Notice they put, wait, hold on, I got to
details.
stop this, but y'all see
And
how
there were
CNN has the coronavirus pandemic, the numbers, the total cases up at the top, and at the bottom, election, 7 days. Reminding you, you know, we have a pandemic, but you got the election in 7 days. Of course, they're tying that in with Trump. But yeah, man. So let's go ahead and just play this.
Overnight as well.
Indeed, John. And the man shot and killed by police has now been identified as Walter Wallace by the mayor of Philadelphia. This all started when police responded to a
Walter
call
Wallace,
reporting a man
I said
wielding a knife
Williams.
in West Philadelphia. What happens next is captured on cell phone video. I'll pause here so we can all listen to it.
Yo, watch my wood. Yo, this is crazy on here.
Oh, Jesus.
We've paused the video, as you can see there, just before Wallace falls to the ground, but you do hear a number of shots fired. John, it isn't clear how many of those bullets struck Wallace. We know he was then taken by police cruiser to a hospital where he died of his injuries. The mayor of the city and the police commissioners say they have reviewed video of what they call the tragic incident. They say it raises many questions, and both have committed to a complete investigation. That, as the president of the police union asks the public to wait for that investigation to be complete and to not vilify the police department. However, the video you're seeing is of the protests that were sparked overnight. There are reports that at least 30 police officers were injured, mostly by projectiles. At least one officer is still in the hospital. She was struck by a truck, breaking her leg and sustaining several other injuries. We know that the mayor of Philadelphia, Jim Kenney, has been in touch with the Wallace family. The police commissioner says she will join the mayor in meeting with members of the family as well as members of the community to hear their concern. She goes on to say that she can feel the anger of the community, certainly very much on display overnight, Allison.
Okay, so that was CNN. Sorry. What the hell was that? Sorry, I hate when these next videos start. Once you stop a video, it goes back. Yeah, so prayers and condolences to that family. My understanding that Mr. Wallace was suffering from mental illness. Let me just say this as a general rule, guys. When you call the police out, especially for a situation like you have a mentally ill relative, a child, a sibling, you are creating a life or death situation. Now, I don't know all the details and facts other than there's alleging that he had a knife in his hand. And you saw from the video that he was walking around the car and so forth, the cars and so forth, and coming in the streets. Police officers are not trained to take someone home. When they're dealing with their training with guns, the main thing that they are taught, because I've had classes where I've, concealed carry permit classes I've been a part of with law enforcement officials who have worked there, worked on on the side doing concealed carry classes, defense classes. The main thing they are taught is to eliminate the threat. Now, what does eliminate mean? Well, eliminate, of course, means to vanquish, to defeat, to remove entirety, to remove from its entirety. So the only thing that when you think of eliminate, the only thing that comes to mind is death. So when you're calling the police in a situation where you have a mentally ill person, especially in situations like what we saw. And previously, a few years ago, I remember a man who was mentally ill that had a screwdriver that lunged at the police, who was suffering from schizophrenia, that ended up dying. And later on, after being shot, of course, he was killed by the cops. They decided to, of course, not press charges. And whenever you have a situation like that, it's dangerous when you bring the police involved. And so my brother Lester, he says, in my opinion, I think all blacks need to listen to Dr. Claude Anderson's plan for a black agenda. Well, Dr. Claude Anderson has been around for a long time, and he has been teaching this plan. He's been around for a while. He's been around for a while. He's been doing this for 40 plus years, and people are just now starting to listen to him. People are just starting to listen to Dr. Anderson, and I think that we're paying attention to him. I mean, when Kanye West shouts you out, then that's a great thing. Well, guys, the world is paying attention. Well, he is here. We have our guest, Councilman at Large, Roger Williams, Councilman at Large, and District Attorney candidate, and nice overall American. What's going on, Councilman?
Everything's going on, Gavin. We're fighting for a new person in the White House, fighting for a new person in DA's office, and we're fighting off storms in the Gulf. So we got a lot to do.
Yeah, well, that's just been 2020, huh?
Yeah, all curves, no brakes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us, Jason. I appreciate it. You're coming on here. I've had your opponent, one of your opponents, because I believe there are 4 people overall running for district attorney, including not just Judge Hunter, but also and yourself, but also Kiva Landrum as former judge, as well as Morris Reed, as a longtime attorney here in New Orleans. And just for the record, we have reached out for everybody out there. We have reached out to Miss Landrum's team to have her come on. We haven't gotten a response yet. But Judge Hunter has graced his presence here, and we thank you for gracing your presence as well.
Glad to be brother.
Yeah, and we'll reach out if we can to see if Mr. Reed would be willing to come on, because I like to give everybody a chance to speak. So what I was just talking about with my guests, with my people before you came on, of course, sadly, there was another police-involved shooting out in Philadelphia. A brother by the name of Walter Wallace Jr., who was killed. And in the wake of George Floyd, in the wake of Jacob Blake and Breonna Taylor, and I've asked this question to Judge Hunter, I wanted to know what is your position on police-involved shootings. If you were elected DA, how would you handle a situation?
You know, I want to go on record, although we have these high-profile incidences of police-involved shootings, America right now doesn't know whether we have more of them in 2020, less of them, or the same, because we're not even keeping accurate data on this. As you know, and as I often say, this has been going on for a very long time. But because of telephones and high definition recordings and being able to push things out in the world very quickly, we find out about these things in other places. As DA,
Jason?
I'm going to make sure that we are course correcting bad police work. I'm here. If a police officer uses a gun, when in fact they should not have used that. Okay. If a police officer uses a gun on a fellow citizen when that force was not necessary, my office is going to treat them like we would treat anyone else, and that is what I believe a good DA's office requires. Not letting someone get through just because they have a uniform, not being held to the same standard we would always be held by. But it starts off on some of those smaller offenses. When a police officer maybe lies on the stand or doesn't do the right thing with evidence, or is just overly abusive or overly aggressive, even if there's no loss of life. So I'm going to make sure my office is looking at these things, small scale and large scale, to stop them from escalating to someone losing their life.
Right. Well, I think the issue that people have, they want to know what they're getting out for their vote. And main thing too is that we see situations happen. It's always like there's no transparency the AGs, whether it's a district attorney or an AG like what we had in Kentucky with Daniel Cameron and the Breonna Taylor situation. I think a lack of transparency is a big problem. And most importantly, when they talk about body cameras and so forth, I'm going to ask you this. Do you feel that deters police misconduct? Because I saw George Floyd's situation. I mean, they had phone cameras pointed at the cops while their knee is on his neck. While the other cop is standing there, the Asian cop that's there, he's looking around and preventing people from getting involved. So does body cameras actually work?
Body cameras help, but they're not a silver bullet. They're not a panacea. I think a lot of people believe that just because an officer is wearing a body camera, then there will be no abuses. There will be no horrific taking of life. But if you don't have a DA in place and you don't have a police chief in place that is going to properly act upon that evidence, the body camera is just going to give you good evidence to deal with a
Looks like we froze again. We're having an issue.
But if you have someone like connectivity, okay.
All right, I can hear you, Jason.
Can you hear me? Okay, I'm back. Let me get this.
I can't see you. Yeah.
Okay. But in the Breonna Taylor case, all the evidence they had wasn't used and presented to the grand jury. And it goes to what you were talking about, which is that secrecy, that lack of transparency. I think these cases don't need to be handled behind closed doors. These cases need to be handled where the public can see what decisions the DA is making and what evidence they are presenting, because the body-worn camera, it's not enough. It is just a tool. And right now that tool is not being used wisely and aggressively enough by the DAs.
Right. I mean, look, I remember as a kid, I was about 5 years old when Rodney King happened. And I remember when Spike Lee put that scene in his movie, Malcolm X. Now, that came out in Rodney King, I think, was in 91, and the riots were in 92. So I don't remember the riots. The only thing I remember about the riots really was In Living Color, because they would make fun of it all. They made fun of everything, but they would make fun of that too. Yeah, Reginald Denny and so forth. Yeah. So I mean, video footage, we know for a fact doesn't really mean you're going to get automatic justice. And I think people are frustrated with that. And another thing I do want to ask you, though, because I'm glad you're talking about you're going to bring transparency. How powerful are these police unions? When they work with because police department is basically they are an employee of the state or the district, and they work hand in hand with the DA's office. So when you have situations, another issue I want to bring up is when you see these police unions fight for their officers, how does that work also with working with the DA's office? Will that create tension later on, because it's like you can't do any wrong against a cop if you're a DA. They look down on that.
Yeah, there's going to absolutely be some tension. But as my mother always tells me, just because something is hard doesn't mean that you don't do it. You've got to do the right thing regardless of how difficult it might be. Our police unions aren't the same as what Larry Krasner, the DA in Philadelphia, has to deal with. Because we have the consent decree, most of our police officers realize that there is a great deal of scrutiny on all the decisions they make, all the decisions they don't make, all the actions they take. So they're getting the NOPD is very used to having extra eyes and ears on them. The one place they've gotten it from the council, they've gotten it from the federal judge, they've gotten it from the federal monitors. The one place they have not gotten it is from the DA's office. Back in 2008, there were a group of off-duty police officers who use racial slurs and beat RTA workers who were trying to use the restroom at a bar, at Beach Corner Bar off of Canal Street. And although there were 40 witnesses and all sorts of evidence, the DA's office dropped the case against them. The DA's office dropped the case against the Danziger Bridge officers, although the federal government went after them. The DA's office has, in our lifetime, has literally just run away from its responsibility to hold police accountable, right? Which is one of the reasons why we have a consent decree. It's because our DA's office has not held them accountable, has not graded their paper, has not corrected bad action. Because when you correct bad officers, it's actually really good for good police officers because it allows them to shine and they don't get stuck with that same officer.
The of silence.
Exactly.
Blue wall. Right. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Right. I certainly see that often, and that's brought up. I've seen situations. I know there was a San Francisco police officer, white man, brought out the history of racism that his fellow police officers indulge in with black suspects. And I believe he was actually ostracized from, that department and so forth. And that's what we as a community would step in, is that when we see, everybody asks, what can we do, especially those outside of our race? Well, we don't need you to tell us what our agenda is, but when you see wrongful conduct, you point it out and you expose them. And that's a big, huge help to us. I think that's the one place you start with.
Yeah, when you said when you see something, you have to expose it. I think that really goes to the heart of the matter. It's just like breast cancer. 30 years ago, people were dying of breast cancer because they weren't going to the doctor fast enough because they were embarrassed and there was a shame associated with it. Now you see football players wearing pink cleats and you see the pink banner, and that exposure, like you just described, has put it on Front Street so that everyone is talking about it. And that's how you correct things. That's how you get cancer and you get it out, is by exposing. And that's what has to happen with law enforcement.
Right. If you sweep dirt under the rug, if they tell you to sweep it up and throw it in the trash, the house is still dirty.
That's right.
Even if it's not visible. So that's one way of putting it. I do want to point out something. I had a colleague of mine, a fellow attorney, Kelvin Rogers, when I announced that you were coming on the show, he said, "Boosie's lawyer?" I do want to ask you, if we can, a little bit, what was it like working on that case? Because that was a high-profile case here, especially here locally. I know that was in Baton Rouge. I lived in Baton Rouge when that was going on.
Yeah, that was quite a case. It was the closest thing that I've ever done to a case that really was taking all of the city's attention and really got national attention. But it also really spoke to what can happen when there is no correction of bad police work. There was a task force that Governor Jindal had set up that had spent millions of dollars supposed to be investigating homicides in the Baton Rouge metropolitan area, and they came up short. They didn't have a case. And then all of a sudden, somebody said they knew Boosie, and you had these folks thinking, well, we could explain the millions of dollars we spent if we got a big fish in the net on some of these cases. And so it really boiled down to one person telling a lie that then the police officer began to build a case off of, and it fell like a ton of bricks as soon as we got it in front of a jury, because all the evidence made it clear that he could not have done what they said they did. And we were able to use real evidence, not just eyewitness evidence, but cell phone site towers that can give you an idea of where a person's phone was at a certain time. And if they were using that phone, it lets you know, well, if somebody's saying they were supposed to be, let's say, at the bottom in Baton Rouge, they could have been there because they were on the other side of town. And so that using real technology and real evidence really proved to be very helpful and making sure justice came to light in that case.
Do you still keep in touch with Boosie?
I do, and he is a wild man. He is liable to say and do anything.
He's Boosie badass. We already know because we've seen. I've seen the Instagram short videos that come up. I've seen the interviews with Vlad and so
Yeah,
forth.
you might need to get him on your show, man. I would watch. I would watch.
Well, I don't know how to get him, so I'm not there yet.
I'll mention it to him. I will mention it to him.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. Well, I do want to ask you, because you mentioned bad policing. I actually lived in Baton Rouge because we talked about all those police shootings. I was in Baton Rouge after Katrina, that September of 05. That I shouldn't say Katrina, but the flood. And so you mentioned, I stayed up there for about 13 years. You mentioned bad policing. I want to talk about bad prosecution because we had something with this incumbent DA who is not running, Leon Canizero. We talk about transparency with the community. The biggest issue I had was this issue of him issuing out subpoenas with notions of false arrest, which I thought was highly not only unethical but illegal that he did. But I don't think anything had ever happened with it. But I want to know, how do you restore trust in the community?
Well, number one, if I get elected, the people of New Orleans know that I was the only elected official. None of the judges at Tulane and Broad spoke out when Leon Canizero was issuing those bogus subpoenas. And I try to remind people, those bogus subpoenas were not for defendants. Those are for innocent people who had done nothing wrong. And he was trying to lock them up or detain them to make them testify. And I stood up against him and actually wrote a resolution from the city council that all my colleagues signed off on, condemning that practice. So one, the people of New Orleans know that they will be able to trust me to live up to the rule of law as it applies to all citizens, not just certain citizens. And the other part of it is we got to rebuild trust. And it's not going to happen overnight, which is why I want to have a conviction integrity unit that goes back and looks at excessive sentences. It looks at persons that were wrongfully convicted, because when you have the wrong person in jail, the real offender is left on the same broken sidewalks that we walk on. And so that's not justice. And a lot of the shootings that are occurring in our community, and a lot of them are happening in New Orleans East, and a lot of them are happening in the Gentilly area and in Central City. These shootings are happening because they're retaliatory, because law enforcement have not solved earlier and past homicides. And so we can rebuild trust by looking back at those cold cases, bringing a real resolution and getting the right person so that people aren't taking that into their own hands and trying to solve it through retaliation in our city streets.
Yeah, Judge Hunter had talked about that too. He had mentioned about the setting up of an independent committee that would oversee some of these cold cases, as well as the police shootings that are involved. I think the main issue with people is just that when they know it's a police involved shooting, like I say again, the transparency thing, it's the state working with the state still in a situation like that. Like how is it that the Warren, like the Warren Commission investigates the Kennedy assassination, but some of the main suspects in that assassination were on Kennedy's assassination were on that committee. So it's just like the wolf is investigating itself about what happened in the chicken coop.
And that's why it hasn't occurred for a very long time. And I think that's one of the things that separates me from some of the folks I'm running against. Like I'm running against a couple of former judges, 3 former judges, although I was a judge in 2003, and 2 former.
Right. Yes, correct.
Right. And 2 former police officers and 1 career prosecutor, right? And so I don't have those bad habits, that I don't have that orientation that feels a need to try to figure out a way where the prosecution was right or the police department was right. I come at it from the lens of the people. As a defense attorney, I have been defending people against the police at times and against bad prosecutors at times. And so I'm going to have that lens that makes sure that there is fairness across the board when it comes to that, and not, have any qualms with prosecuting a police officer when we need to, and also having the know-how to bring in outside special prosecutors to handle those cases against police officers, so that you don't have an ADA who's gotten too friendly or too chummy with the police officer in question, right? So just like you described, having certain commissions, you need to make sure those commissions are conflict-free as well.
Most definitely. Now, Jason, I do want to ask you this briefly. Of course, it's been public news about the indictment that you faced back in June. And I know there's some things you can't talk about because it's pending litigation. Every person that's accused of something is innocent until proven guilty. But I just want to ask just about that. How has it been to run a campaign with that over your head? Has it been difficult? And what has been keeping you up and keep moving forward?
When I first found out what they were doing, like I found out that Canizero had people who were following me and investigating every facet of my life, my college roommate, anything they just looked at, any rock they could turn over. When I first found out they were doing that, it was scary, right? We all have heard stories of things like this actually happening. And then when I found out that he had gotten the Department of Justice involved, and they actually were going to try to actually bring a real case right as I was qualifying for DA, it actually made me so angry that conservative folks that did not want to see real reform, that didn't want to see police accountability, all the things that I was committed to, it made me angry, and it actually had me more fired up to fight to win this office, to bring real change, because I saw how desperately they were trying to stop it from happening. And then I don't know if you realize, but the first day of early voting, the head of the Department of Justice, Bill Barr, came in town to give a speech saying, we don't want progressive-minded DAs. We don't want any DA who has a lens towards social justice. Now, he is the boss of the two people who are going after me, right? So it really proved what I had been saying the whole time when he came down to say that. But to answer your question succinctly, at first I was scared. To be honest with you, I don't know if I've said that to anybody else, but nobody's asked a question the way you did.
Naturally, yeah.
At first I was scared, and then I became frustrated. But then I just got fired up because I looking back as a student of history, they've used this playbook so many times. They've used it all over the country. They used it against civil rights activists. They used it against a number of African-American elected politicians, but no charges were ever brought or no charges were ever won. And so people don't remember that. But as it stands right now, the fact that the truth is actually starting to really come out, it's just only fired me up.
Okay, most definitely. And I want to talk, that's very good. Pro tempore judge in 2003, appointed by the Louisiana Supreme Court. What was that like briefly? Oh, I don't know how long you were pro tempore judge, but what was that like being a judge?
It was great to see the system from another angle, not as an advocate, but as someone who had to make sure that there was justice being served in court every day. Like, you're not on one side or the other, but it doesn't mean you're neutral. A lot of folks like to say, oh, as a judge, I couldn't say this. As a judge, I couldn't say this. I had to be neutral. You cannot be neutral when someone is violating someone else's rights. A judge has to always make sure that people's rights are protected in court, i.e., if someone is coming in and English isn't their first language, you have to make sure there's an interpreter. If a DA is violating a defendant's rights, you have to make sure that that does not occur in your court and correct it when it does. And so I really am I'm blessed to not have been reversed at all. None of my opinions or rulings when I was on the bench, none of my sentences. And I'm also blessed that I had the character to not ever sign some material witness bond, right? Because a lot of the folks I'm running against who say they were against Canizaro's bogus subpoenas, they actually signed the material witness bonds that he asked them to sign, although they came from originally bogus subpoenas. And the other thing I'll tell you is I got to experience one judge trial in particular, John Thompson, who was wrongfully convicted and was in Angola on death row for a number of years, not just because of bad police work, but because of bad prosecutors. Like, they hid evidence. And he was scheduled to be released on a certain month because it was proven that he was innocent. And the DA's office Harry Connick's office brought trumped up charges against him, saying he tried to fight a sheriff's deputy in jail in his last week. Now, John was about 5'8", and might have been 160 pounds wet. The guy he was accused of starting a fight with and beating up was about 305 pounds. It was about 6'4". It was a ludicrous accusation and charge. I found him not guilty. He did eventually go home, and so it was. I was blessed to be in a place to do the right thing at that moment.
Yeah, most definitely. That's wow. And you know, those resisting arrest charges, those are and disorderly conduct. You know as well as I do, because I'm an attorney myself. But those are the easiest ones that they can try and get you on something.
Yeah.
If a cop grabs you, if somebody grabs you in general, your natural reaction is basically to pull away
Right.
or push on. So even when you pull away, they can consider that to be a resisting arrest. And if I'm not mistaken, earlier this year, of course, Governor John Bel Edwards, he signed, not this year, but a couple of years back, the Blue Lives Matter law into law. And I believe that is now a felony if you resist a police officer, not a misdemeanor, and without those circumstances. So which brings to my point about reform. I want to ask you, what is your position, though, on nonviolent offenders and marijuana charges?
So I wrote the legislation that decriminalized marijuana in the city of New Orleans. So now you get a summons. And I wrote that because I was getting the numbers, because I created these dashboards that let us see who was being arrested, what they were being arrested for. So you could see the racial breakdown. And they were basically, the NOPD was only arresting mostly Black folks for simple possession of marijuana. And that there's no public safety benefit to arresting people for that. And so I will not prosecute simple possession of marijuana, nor will I take simple possession of most drug cases. I won't burden our court dockets with those cases. I will work to handle those cases through a diversion program for a person who has an addiction. Then we will get them addiction counseling in a much more efficient and economically prudent way outside of court, without them getting a felony and not having ability to work or go to school. And I think whether it be addiction, whether it be mental health, all these things have been criminalized in the city of New Orleans. So low-level nonviolent offenses, I'm going to figure out a way that we put those things in a diversion program and spend dollars more wisely, because it is too costly to try to give all those people as much time as we possibly can, using sentencing enhancements and clogging up the dockets, so that we're not able to prioritize serious crime. And that's really important piece. Like, I'm not just saying this as a feel-good measure. It is a feel-good measure. It's the right thing to do. But we also need to free up space, man and woman power, and resources to focus on handling murder, rape, and armed robbery cases in a way where ADAs have enough time and energy to do it.
Yeah, that's good. I think that having more energy and time to prosecute those cases, especially cold murder cases, is important to a lot of people. You know, I live out here in New Orleans East, so just last night as I'm about to go to bed, I was turning the lights off. I heard about 5 or 6 gunshots from outside my house. So, I mean, and you hear it often. And even when I was a kid coming up in the early 90s, I used to hear it hit the deck, you know, when you heard stuff like that. But I don't know how, of course, it's hard to police those situations, but we need somebody there that will do it. We need somebody there that will bring accountability. And I'm glad you brought up that piece of legislation that you wrote, but also the position about the fake subpoenas, because I think that was a huge issue. But another issue I have is about your position on. Do you have any position on reforming the bail here in New Orleans? Particular, that's something that I heard your opponent, Mr. Judge Hunter, bring up. Do you have a position on that?
I do. I wrote legislation on the council about 2 years ago, which we called municipal bail reform, right? Because there's a number of people who are in municipal court simply because they couldn't put together a few $100s to bail out. Now, if the bail was only $500 or $400, clearly we didn't think this person was a real threat to public safety. They just ended up getting stuck there because they were poor. And so I'm fully against that. I don't believe that a person's access to cash or whether or not they own their home should be the measure by whether they stay in jail or not, right? So as a defense attorney for a number of years, I've fought to have bonds reduced on people so they could go home and get back to work and take care of their families and help get kids to school. And as DA, I'm going to do that same thing. And there's going to be some cases where I'm not even going to require anybody to post a bond because as long as they're willing to come back to court and they're not a threat to themselves or anyone else, then there's 100 different ways we can monitor their behavior between that arraignment and trial. And it actually, on the flip side of it, if you just care about taxes and the conservative piece of it, one 40-person pod at the current jail costs the city $2.75 million just to staff watching those people. So there's a fiscal reason we don't need to be doing that, and there's a moral reason why we don't need to be doing that. And let's just say you've got a serial rapist out here like Harvey Weinstein. If he's a billionaire and you set $1 million bond and he makes it, just because he's wealthy enough to make that bond doesn't mean that the people who survived his attacks are safe.
Yeah. Well, I think, well, when you're talking about now, especially with bail reform, and I'm looking at the situation with the coronavirus, you'll have people who are nonviolent offenders that are locked up in there because they don't have access to capital. And right now, too, you have a situation where most of the all the country practically had been shut down for the last 4 or 5 months, probably longer. And I don't know if we'll ever shut down again because I think a lot of people are trying to keep that away from doing that because they need to make money. But jobs people have been laid off. People don't have access to liquid cash like talking about. So when we talk about bail reform, I'm looking specifically, at and I'm glad you're pointing this out about nonviolent offenders and people who are not a threat to society that are locked up in it.
And we want those people to get back to their jobs, right? Because so that they can take care of their families and they can continue to work in the economy. And the other piece that you brought up, when you have COVID being as invasive as it is in terms of how it spreads from a person who has symptoms and doesn't have symptoms, why would we want an incubator at the jail with sheriff deputies coming and going, right? With inmates staying for short periods and some of them going home when they get out, and basically spreading COVID-19. Smart cities have shrunk the number of folks that are in that jail so that they're not creating a space where they can have super spreader situations like any jail absolutely would be.
All right. I'm trying to see if we had any questions or comments from the chat right now, Jason.
Okay.
A little earlier before you came on. let's see. I don't see any comments except I talked about Lester Wheeler. Lester Wheeler had asked he would like to know what are we getting for our vote. I had went over that before you came on, but if you want to answer that, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting someone who has proven their commitment to real reform, wrote the legislation on misdemeanor marijuana being summonsable offenses, so people aren't getting locked up for it.
Yeah.
Created public-facing dashboards so the public can really see what government is doing, and not just grade our paper at election time, but grade our paper every day just by logging on to the city website to see what we have done and what those results are. Writing the legislation for municipal bail reform, writing the legislation to stop the judges at Tulane and Broad from being able to access fines and fees on poor people just so they can use it as a slush fund. All these things are things that I did while on the city council, not in expectation to run for DA, but because it needed to happen in the city of New Orleans. And whether some people like it or don't like it, I ran those meetings and pushed to take down the monuments to the White League and Robert A. Lee and Jefferson Davis. And, we got death threats doing all of that. But those monuments need to come down. But there are other monuments to white supremacy and racism that are not made out of cement, not made out of stone. The criminal justice system is the biggest monument and testament to white supremacy. When you look at the number of brown, beige bodies, black, brown, and beige bodies that get funneled into that system and feed that system with no public safety benefit.
Yeah. And that is a big monument of white supremacy. But even in terms of monuments here in New Orleans, Andrew Jackson was one of the biggest of them all. I know that's Jackson Square, and he was the president. But
yeah,
you're
right.
Yeah, we suffered. Minister Farrakhan even said we've suffered more under the American flag than we ever did. The Confederacy. Which was 4 years. But the Confederacy, the Confederate flag, what we call the stars and stripes, that's actually the Ku Klux Klan flag. Confederate flag is actually different. A lot of people don't know that. But most definitely, man. Well, Jason, it's a pleasure that you came on here to stop by. I do have a question though in the background. Whose boxing gloves are those that are autographed?
Those Regis program, the People's Champ, the New Orleans People Champ. He's going to be fighting Saturday, as a matter of fact. And Regis sent those to me after his big professional fight out at UNO a while back. And
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and so he's a good friend, and he makes New Orleans shine every time he gets in that ring and the way he carries himself. And he's got his fight Saturday, and then I'm next up on Tuesday, Election Day.
Tuesday, yes. If you want, today, ladies and gentlemen, is the last day to vote early. Of course, there are other things that are on the ballot aside from the presidential race. The district attorney's race is one of them. And we have a candidate here, one of the 4 candidates, Mr. Jason Williams, Councilman at Large. I do want to ask you, though, too, Councilman, if you could, would you just stay on after the end of the broadcast? I did have a question I wanted to ask you off the record.
Absolutely. And I would also, I believe we're going to win this race. We're leading in the polls, every poll that's been done. And I'd like to make a commitment to come back on your show after we win this thing, and then also come back on this show after I take office to talk about some of the things we're doing.
Most definitely. And you can bring Boosie on if you'd like to. So,
that's a whole different show. I'm going to let you do that one by yourself.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. And also, you want to shout out some family, some friends, who've been helping you?
Oh yeah, man. I mean, the list is too long to start, but Tyrone Walker has been working really hard. Lena Stewart, really shout out to the people of New Orleans, because as you brought up before, he's like, what was it like running under the specter of an indictment? And no matter where I go, whether it's uptown, downtown, New Orleans East, the community has had my back. They have stood with me. They have said, we know this is old school political tricks. We are standing with you and we're voting for you. And the polls show that. So I just really, my heart goes out to and I will always defend the rights of the people of this city because they have stood by me.
All right. Well, thank you. And where can people, if they want to check out your website, what is the name of the website? And
the website is Run with Jason, RUN WITH Jason, and that's the Instagram and Facebook as well.
All right. You heard it, guys. Run with Jason. That is his website. Thank you, District Attorney candidate and Councilman Jason Williams. And this has been another episode of Gavin Richard Presents here on channel GBOO2786 and Gavin Richard, my self-entitled YouTube channel, as well as Facebook. Thank you all for watching. And I will see you in the next one. I'll holla. Peace.